Good morning. Thank you for joining us today at the President's Task Force on Education, Outreach, and Engagement live stream, Understanding Residuals for SAG-AFTRA Performers. To stay informed about this and all other live streams and video events, we invite you to subscribe to this channel. You can go ahead and do that right now. The presentation will begin momentarily. If you have questions that you'd like to direct to today's guests, please email pteoe@sagaftra.org. That's pteoe@sagaftra.org. We receive a number of questions and may not be able to get to all of them, but we'll answer you as we can after today's seminar. As a reminder, today's program is being recorded and you can watch the replay right here on SAG-AFTRA's YouTube channel, along with more great content. Now, please give a warm welcome to today's host, SAG-AFTRA Executive Vice President and New York President, Rebecca Damon.
Hi there. Thank you very much, Pam. Welcome, everybody. You are in for a real treat today as we present today's topic, Understanding Residuals for SAG-AFTRA Performers. Today's presentation is going to be a discussion about how members and non-members earn payments through their work on SAG-AFTRA contracts. I want to also extend a big hello from our national president, Gabrielle Carteris, who is actually right now in line for a COVID test for work that she's going to be doing in the next couple of days. She couldn't make it right now. She might join us for the end of the presentation, but she sends her regards to all of you. And as all of us who have had to wait in a line for a COVID test know, we're hoping it goes quickly. Today's presentation, though, is going to be just terrific. This is a presentation that we think you're going to find really helpful for your professional lives. For some people, this may be a first conversation for some of our younger and newer performers. And for some of us, it's a refresher for more seasoned performers. So we're going to cover today what residuals are, how that compensation is paid for performers for use of a theatrical motion picture or a television production, beyond the use covered by the initial compensation, when residuals are paid, how they're calculated, how to track them, all of that. I also want to give a big shout out. Earlier this year, National Executive Director David White and myself were in the New Orleans local for a member meeting. And I want to give a shout out to the folks in NOLA and specifically their president, Diana Boylston, for making sure we were going to do this in person for them earlier. But with COVID and everything else, we didn't have the chance to do that. But I want to thank Diana for keeping it on deck so we could do it for the whole country, which is exciting. So thanks, Diana. We have really fantastic guests today. We have Jen Gaudry, who's going to lead today's presentation and the discussion along with Ray Rodriguez. In Jennifer's role, she works to improve the union's ability to address chronic enforcement challenges by strategizing and managing interdepartmental enforcement initiatives and integrating those initiatives with the development of bargaining strategy. So those of you that have been to wages and working conditions, which we call W&W meetings, you might have seen Jen talk about these important topics. She works to ensure that contract interpretations and arbitration referrals are consistent with and supportive of the union's initiatives and broader objectives. And we also are very lucky to have Ray Rodriguez here today, who is our Chief Contracts Officer for SAG-AFTRA. And he has served either as a lead negotiator or a second chair at all different kinds of major negotiations other than broadcast. Since he took on this role in the merged union, he's done negotiations for theatrical motion pictures, television, what we know as TV theatrical, commercials, corporate and educational videos, video games. Between Jennifer and Ray, you've just got a wealth of experience today. So I'm going to stop talking because I don't want to take up too much of the time. I want to put you with our experts, and there is a lot to cover. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Ray and Jen, and we'll give them a big virtual welcome. Go ahead.
Hello, everyone. I'm going to really turn this over to Jen, who's going to be your guide through the wonderful world of residuals today. You heard Rebecca describe her role, and within that and part of that, Jen is the leading expert in our industry on our residuals, how they work, how they're processed. She knows more than really anyone that I've encountered. So you're going to get information directly from the source. We all appreciate her. I've learned a lot of what I know about residuals from her, and now you will too. So let me turn that over to Jen.
Thanks, Ray. Go ahead, Jen.
All right, thank you. I wouldn't say I'm the only one. I'm hopefully a handful of people who know a lot about residuals. So let me just get straight to sharing my screen so we can go right into the presentation. All right, so hopefully everybody can see that. And we'll go straight into the next slide. So to start off, we're going to be talking about residuals for television, theatrical, and new media programs. New media programs meaning those that are made for any of the streaming sites. Now, residuals are also paid for commercials, but for this presentation, we're not going to be touching on commercials. The commercials department would do that separately. So all principal performers of all types and categories can get residuals. So singers, dancers, stunts, actors, pilots, the list goes on. Only background actors and body doubles are not entitled to residuals. And the key to knowing when to expect residuals is really going to start with understanding what your initial compensation covers. When you go to work, some sort of exhibition is included for your initial compensation. Residuals only become due if an exhibition takes place that is not covered by your initial comp. So if you're working on anything other than a theatrical picture, you're being paid an overscale rate, you're not a day player, is the company also advance paying some residuals? Is the compensation you're getting really what you're getting paid for the work and that initial release? Or is your compensation really not all initial comp and some of it is advance pay that's getting you paid upfront for residuals that would be due in the future? So check your contract, understand what your initial compensation is going to get as far as a initial release. And since residuals for TV and new media programs are based on the initial release, you want to consider whether maybe you should have language in your contract about what would happen if, let's say, a show that you think is being made for basic cable actually ends up going straight to a pay TV channel like HBO or to a streaming platform like Disney Plus or to network primetime. So you're going to get residuals no matter what. But if you would expect different compensation for an ABC show than you would for a Disney Plus show or than you would for a freeform show, and you'd be fine with, let's say, advance payment of a network primetime rerun, but maybe not with 25 reruns on basic cable, you should have those conversations with your agent, understand what it says in your contract. Clarity about your original compensation means you can know what residuals are going to be due to you and when they'll be due. So there are two types of residuals formulas. Fixed residuals are calculated based on how you as an individual performer were engaged and paid, and they're tied to a specific exhibition. They're due to the union anywhere from 30 days to 4 months after that triggering exhibition. So you have a rerun in network primetime, 30 days later, residuals are due for that rerun. You work on a basic cable show, it reruns on basic cable, residuals are due 4 months after that exhibition. But the majority of residuals are distributors' gross receipts, and they're tied to payments on a license. So the revenue received for either sales of a DVD or for a license to a pay TV channel or to a streaming platform. And those are going to be due quarterly when there's revenue sufficient enough to issue checks to the entire cast. So revenue-based residuals mean performers in the show are going to split a pool of money on a pro rata basis. You don't have that direct correlation between an exhibition and a residual payment being due. It's tied to revenue rather than to a specific exhibition. And most residuals, like I said, are the gross receipts based kind. But let's start with a closer look at the fixed residual formulas. So fixed residuals are only applicable to certain types of exhibitions of TV and new media, the streaming programs. Theatrical pictures don't have any fixed residuals. So that box at the top that says theatrical residuals would be if you had a television program that had a theatrical release. So the list of this type of exhibition are going to be calculated using what we refer to as total applicable minimum. Fixed residuals are all going to use either total applicable minimum or total actual compensation. So we're starting with total applicable minimum, and you'll notice these descriptions are very specific. That's on purpose. Unlimited theatrical exhibition of a TV or new media program is going to be a gross receipts-based residual. After the first year of streaming of a television program, it's again going to switch to a gross receipts-based residual. The way that the free TV formula works is, again, initial exhibition is this fixed residual, but then after all the aggregated licenses for all the exhibitions in countries all around the world, you take the value of all those licenses to all those free TV stations all around the world, and when the value hits a certain point, again, this switches to a gross receipts-based residual. And for reruns, you're going to have a prime time on the CW is always going to be a rerun-based residual. Residuals of a made-for-basic cable show rerunning on basic cable are going to be a fixed residual, a percentage of applicable minimum for the first license, but again, it'll switch to a gross receipts-based residual for subsequent licenses. So you can see these are sort of very limited types of exhibition for a limited period of time where they get paid. But let's look at how they're calculated. So here's an example of a day player who's working for an overscale rate, plus their agent's fee, plus some overtime, plus some penalties. Overscale compensation and things like stun adjustments, your agent's commission are not included in your total applicable minimum. Contractual bumps for extra voices done under animation agreements are included in applicable minimum, but pretty much everything else is just scale. There's no ceiling or cap, but unless you or your agent negotiate something different, your applicable minimum is really just going to be the scale rate based on the type of hire. So if you were hired as a singer, it would be your singer rate. If you're hired as a weekly performer, it'd be the weekly rate. A day performer, the day rate. A stunt coordinator, the stunt coordinator rate for the days or week that you worked. So the other type of fixed residual is total actual compensation, like I mentioned. These are even more limited. So you have your network primetime reruns, which are only primetime, so 8 p.m. to 11 p.m. on ABC, CBS, NBC, Fox. And then again, you're going to get your total actual compensation, or for the high budget shows that are being done for all the streaming platforms. So those are called SVOD service, subscription video on demand is what SVOD stands for. And again, that's going to use TAC to calculate those. So you've got a 20-minute or longer show. Most of the big series for all these SVOD platforms are going to be these high budget shows. So let's do an example of how TAC is calculated. So this is different. You're going to look at what you actually earned. But again, you're going to have to do a little bit of adjustment. So if you get paid an overscale rate, your overscale compensation is included. If is an agent commission, that's included. If you have overtime, that's included, but it's calculated at straight time, not at the time and a half. Penalties and fees are not included. And TAC is always going to be capped at a specific ceiling that's tied to the type of show that you're working on and the date you did it. So a half-hour network primetime show has one ceiling. A 1-hour primetime show has a different ceiling. The high-budget SVOD shows have different ceilings. But this is how you would get to TAC. Again, you're going to include some of that overscale rate, your agent's commission, overtime at straight time. You would include stunt adjustments if you're a stunt performer, everything until you reach that ceiling, and then you're capped. So let's do an actual example. And for people who hate math, just wait till the next slide. We'll move on. But for people who want to see how this works, here's how it goes. So let's say we've got a day player who worked 1 day for scale plus 10 and a weekly performer who worked 1 week for scale plus 10. So for those performers, you're going to use what they earned, their actual compensation, the 1133 for the day performer and the 4108 for the weekly performer, except that the 4108 actually exceeds the half-hour network primetime ceiling. So that performer is going to get the ceiling. And so that's your half-hour ceiling right now for network primetime reruns, the 2527. And then remember when we talked about TAM residuals, so if it's also going to go to foreign free, which most of the network shows do, that's going to be 35% of applicable minimum. So that's why I have your day rate and weekly rate at the top, because that's TAM. So your day rate, that scale of 1,030 is TAM. Their actual compensation is 1133 for the day player. So the network primetime rerun is that 100% of TAC, 1133. And the foreign free is 35% of applicable minimum. So 35% of the 1,030. So enough with math for the moment. Move on. So to do the math for a high budget SVOD show gets even a little more complicated. Here's how it works. You're going to start with total actual compensation again. That's going to get adjusted by a subscriber factor. So each of the platforms, the SVOD platforms, have a subscriber factor applicable to them. The more domestic subscribers, the higher the subscriber factor. So right now, Peacock, for people who are paying extra to not see ads, would be at the 40% subscriber tier. Apple Plus and HBO Max are at 65%. Amazon's at 100%. Netflix is at 150%. Those subscriber factors can get adjusted July 1 of each year. Again, it's based on the number of domestic subscribers to the platform. And then you would multiply your either TAC or the ceiling. Each year, you're going to get a percentage of that for use on the platform. So those will start 90 days is covered by initial compensation. And then in year 1, you'll get 45% of your TAC or the ceiling per the applicable subscriber factor. So this is how that sort of descends year over year for exhibition on the platform. And then foreign, we depart even a little further, your foreign residual, if it's a fixed residual for a big platform like Netflix, where they have people all around the world who can also watch the show, whatever your residual for the domestic exhibition is, 35% of that number is going to pay for the foreign use. So now it's going to come a kind of complicated looking slide. Let's look at 2 years of streaming on Netflix. And we'll use a 1-hour show. Most of their shows are 1 hour, their series. And this time I'm going to actually show sort of how the formula has changed under the 2014 agreement, the 2017 agreement, and the 2020 agreement. We renegotiate our contracts about every 3 years. So that's why I'm talking about the terms we negotiated for 2014, the terms we negotiated, in 2017, and then the update that we just did in 2020. Since some of these series are continuing under all 3 of those terms, we'll show you all 3. And again, we're going to use our 1 day player who worked for Scale Plus 10 and our 1 week weekly performer who also worked for Scale Plus 10. So in 2014, you're going to start with your TAC, and then you're going to compare that to the ceiling. So you can see underneath each of these in parentheses, I have what the ceiling is for a 1-hour show under those agreements. So you compare your total actual compensation to the ceiling and you use whichever one is lower. So our our weekly performer is going to use the ceiling under the 2014 and the 2017 terms, but in 2020, now 4108 is actually below the ceiling. The ceiling's above the weekly rate, so now you're using their total actual compensation. And that ceiling is going to go up again for the 2020 residuals to 4451 as of July of next year. So those ceilings keep moving up. That's a good thing. That means more larger residuals checks for people who have higher earnings.
Jen?
So
I just wanted to make the comment on this slide that this really illustrates why it has been important to prioritize improving the high budget SVOD residuals over the past several contract cycles. You may recall in the summer, we talked about the improvements that we made in 2020. This is increasingly where the viewership is and increasingly where your residuals are going to come from in the future. So I think this slide gives you a good illustration of why we prioritize those formulas and bargaining and what the impact of that has been. Thanks for letting me interrupt.
Yeah, so the other place you can see those improvements, which is what's informing the change to the numbers that are in bold, is in 2014, your initial compensation covered an entire year of use on the platform. So that's why that total actual compensation is times 0 plus 30%, as opposed to in 2017, where your initial comp now only covers 90 days, and we added a sort of a year one residual. So now you're getting the subscriber factors, we only had 2 of them, 65% and 100% in 2014. The 150% was added in 2017. So now instead of getting 100% of total actual compensation times 30%, you're going to get 150%, and it's 75%, which goes up again in 2020. Now you're looking at 85% of your total actual comp, or the ceiling, which has already been moved up to 150% for these Netflix shows. So that's what's informing the improvement to these numbers. Then for foreign, again, in 2014, that number you saw at the top covered worldwide exhibitions. So it included all their related and affiliated foreign platforms around the world. In 2017, we added a separate residual for foreign. So you're going to get the day player. Their domestic residual is the 1104 under the 2017 number. 35% of that is 364. That's your foreign. We made some improvements to the foreign residuals in 2020 for later years. It used to be sort of a descending percentage of your residuals. It wasn't 35% for every single year of foreign use, but now it is. So 35% of whatever you're getting for domestic is what you get for foreign without any decrease over time. So here's your total, and you can see now how those numbers have improved. So your day player for a Netflix show under 2014 terms for 2 years of use was going to get $340. Now they're going to get $1,950, and that weekly performer was getting $1,100. Now they're going to get $7,000. So you can, again, to raise points, see how things have improved. So now we're moving on to the gross receipts-based residuals, which I said are the more common one. And basically every single type of show is going to have this type of residual applicable to it. Theatrical pictures only use gross receipts-based residuals. They are based on a calendar quarter. You can see the quarters. They're due 60 days at the close of the quarter. And it can take anywhere from usually 30 maybe to 60 days. I'm getting a lot of sun on me. I see that. As time, for processing time. And we'll get into that as well. They are going to be a percentage of the revenue attached to a picture or an episode when it gets distributed to different media. That's going to make up a pool. A percentage of that revenue is going to make up a pool that is split among the performers. And that split can happen a couple different ways. So we'll take a look at how pro rata share is determined. So the theatrical pictures, all types of movies, even TV movies, SVOD movies, all animated shows are going to use time and salary units. So think of this as, so movies for pay TV, even like HBO or Stars, think of it as pieces of a pie. The smallest slice is going to be a performer who works one day at scale. The biggest slice would be for someone who worked at least 5 weeks and was paid the equivalent of 10 weeks at scale or above. So someone working for an overscale rate with additional compensation for things like your agent's commission, overtime, stunt adjustments, and so on, are going to have their salary units higher than their time units. But they're all going to be, every single principal performer who appears in the picture is going to be having their time and salary converted to units. Sorry, I don't know about the sun. For series, pro rata distribution gets compressed to 3 units. So this is for free TV series, ones that you can see. It's not going to be applicable to if you're on a series for like HBO or Stars or Showtime. Those still use time and salary units, but basically every single other kind of series is going to use 3-2-1. So if you're a day player, you're 1 unit, weekly, you're 2 units, and only performers who are on series contracts are going to be 3 units. If you happen to work on multiple day player contracts for 1 episode, you're still 1 unit. Or if you work on, say, a weekly contract and a day player contract for the same episode, you're 2 units. So let's walk through how a gross receipts-based residual is going to be paid. And we'll look at an example of a movie, like either made for theatrical or maybe something made for HBO or Showtime that moves over to a streaming platform like Amazon or Disney. So distributors' gross receipts is the license payment or fee or revenue that's being paid or shared by the exhibiting platform for the right to exhibit that picture or episode. So as an example, everything Netflix pays to Universal in order to be able to show Jurassic Park would be your definition of distributors' gross receipts. So to get to the residuals due to each performer, you start with the total unit count for the entire cast who are getting residuals. So that number can vary a lot. An animated feature film might have around, 100, 125 total units, but a big budget action movie that can have well over 1,000 units because of the large cast size, lots of stunts, music, post-production, very long production timeframes. So you're going to take the applicable grosses and multiply that by the residuals percentage, which in this case is 3.6%. That will get you to the pool that will make up all the residuals and P&H contributions that are applicable to that $5 million license. So the P&H rate at the time of production determines the contributions to the plans. That's how you get to the rate. And then the leftover money in the residuals pool is divided among the performers based on pro rata share. So you take the total units for the entire cast, and you divide that into the total residuals that's being shared by everybody. That gets you to the value of a single unit. And then you can multiply that by however many units each performer has. So that day performer who gets 1/5 of a unit for the day he worked or she worked and 1/5 of the unit for the salary earned is that 279 times 0.4. The weekly performer who worked at scale has 1 time unit, 1 salary unit. So they're the 279 times 2. And that's how it works for the entire cast who are in the picture. That's how the split would happen. And obviously any change to the number of total units, the value of the license, the P&H rate is going to change up how that math works out. So the process for doing a gross receipts-based residual for a series is very similar. And except first you have to get to the value of that license per episode. And here's an example for anybody who reads The Hollywood Reporter. This example may look sort of familiar. And because it's for an entire series, like I said, first you have to get to the grosses per episode. Generally, you're just going to divide evenly across all the episodes, and then you're calculating them on a per episode basis. So grosses need to be tracked on a per episode basis for several reasons. Cast sizes vary from episode to episode. Pension, health, and retirement contribution rates change over time, and not every single episode is necessarily going to have an identical exhibition pattern to all the rest of the episodes. So we'll take a look at an example of how 2 episodes from the same season can yield different results. So here's how we're going to look. The grosses are going to be the same. The P&H rate is going to be the same. The only difference is the number of performers in episode X will be 10, and in episode Y will be 18. So here's how you do it. It's basically the same process as we just did for the theatrical example. The total units for the cast, take out the contributions that go to the plans, and then divide the pool among all the performers based on what's left, to get to the value of a unit, multiply that times however many units each performer has. So this is what a series performer would get, any weekly performer would get, and any day player would get for this example, where you've got that 22 units into the 73,000 in grosses. But episode Y, which had a larger cast, has very different result to performers. So your series performer, who was getting about $8,900 in the previous example, is now getting around $6,100. Your weekly performers went from about $5,900 down to about $4,000, and your day players from about $2,900 to $2,000. So, and this would be again for the whole 5-year license. But that's how you can be in a circumstance where your actual check is going to vary from episode to episode, even though it's all part of the same license, right? The size of the cast is going to have an impact on that. And then remember, the gross receipts-based residuals are paid in any quarter where revenue is received. So if we assume this license gets paid once each year, here's what your scale performers in each of our examples are going to get paid for each year of the SVOD exhibition, and what they would get for the, compared to the theatrical. So this is just sort of how you have this wide range of how gross receipts-based residuals work when you're dividing a pot of money among the people who are in a cast. So for a quick recap, if you're working on a show that's made, and we're focusing on SVOD because that seems to be where I get most of the questions these days. If you're working on a show that's made for one of the SVOD platforms, and it's a high budget show, which is most of the series or movies being made for the platforms these days, then you're going to get that fixed residual each year. If you work on a theatrical picture or a TV show that's getting moved over to one of the platforms, then instead it's a gross receipts-based residual. And it's the same formula if viewers are paying a fee to watch for a limited period of time. So let's say I'm not actually an Amazon Prime member and I'm just going onto Amazon and paying a one-time fee to watch something for 24 hours. Or if I am an Amazon Prime subscriber and I'm watching something as part of my subscription, in both cases, the residual is a gross receipts-based residual, and it's at that 3.6% of distributors' gross. So all of that is why is part of the reason why the residuals and the reporting that's attached to us, which is going to help us understand how the math is being done, gets sent to the union for processing. But besides helping your staff and negotiators and negotiating committee to understand how companies are paying and making sure things are getting done properly, there's also a benefit to performers by having us process your residuals. So I can't stress this enough. Keep your address and your contact information current with the union. 30 years from now, you may not still be in touch with every single production company that you might have worked for over the decades that your career hopefully spans. But your residuals from any of those productions will still get to you as long as the union knows how to find you or eventually your heirs. We can provide you with a history printout when you request one. You can view your residuals payments online with the tracker that's online, and hopefully everyone is signed up to get their residuals through direct deposit, at which point your address doesn't even matter quite as much either. So boxes of checks are received quarterly, weekly, and daily. Here is the volume of a one-day number of boxes that got received for one quarterly reporting period. To put it another way, in 2016, our processing department handled nearly 3.6 million checks that were valued at nearly $928 million. Last year, in 2019, those numbers had increased. So we processed 4,889,098 checks, and the total residuals reported was $1,057,656,897. So that's why I say again, please sign up for direct deposit if you haven't already, and keep your address and contact information current. So here's what's happening during processing time. It's not just a matter of the checks come in and we stick them in a different envelope and send them to you. We have to, make sure we're not only just getting the checks, but all that reporting that is informing us how they're doing the math, what sort of exhibitions are getting paid for, all that sort of thing. Step 5 is where on the tracker, you will see your residuals listed as in process. So at that point, we've figured out we've got all the reporting. It matches up to the checks. It's looking good. And it gets loaded into the system and you can see it is in process. Occasionally, we still discover a glitch at that point. So you don't see a mail date until it gets to step 6. That's the point when it's been batched, it's ready to go. And you'll get a statement or you'll get a direct deposit at that point. So I know that was a lot of dense information and a whirlwind amount of time. So, but hopefully it was helpful. And here's where to reach out if you have additional questions, you need additional information. We'll do a Q&A right now as well. And if you haven't already signed up for direct deposit, this is where you can go to do that as well. So I can just leave this slide up as we go to the Q&A, or take the presentation down. Rebecca, what do you prefer?
Leave it up for just 1 second so people can see that SAG-AFTRA.org direct deposit sign up on there, so they can jot that down, and then we'll have you take it down so that I can see you better. Even with your sunlight on, I'm having the same moment. Here we go. This is yeah. So go ahead and take that slide down. That'll be great. We have so many questions today, Jen. And, you know, I'm always sort of struck by the mathy nature of all of this. And it really is a lot. And so I was just looking at the enormous amount of information, and I think it's overwhelming. I want people to know one thing. We are going to have this available so people can watch it again at a later time, because I know that sometimes, like, for a lot of people that pay a lot of attention to this, they might know all the things, but like it really is a lot of information, and people may want to actually go back through and stop and start. So I got a lot of great questions for you and Ray. The first one that came in was, I shot a scene from Fargo this season, but unfortunately I got cut. I've yet to double check my contract, but if the scene gets put on the deleted scenes portion of a DVD set or anything like that for the series, would I still receive residuals for that?
So yes, because at the point when it's included on a DVD as a deleted scene, you're now part of that exhibition. So yes, you would be entitled to residuals as a result of that. But I would try to follow up on that. So that sort of brings us to what we track versus what you track. The union does our best to keep on top of everything, but if you notice that you are in the deleted scenes of a video and you don't get residuals within 6 to 8 months of that release, then reach out to us and we'll make sure that it wasn't a circumstance where the company, didn't realize that you were in that scene and accidentally omitted you from that residual payment. But yes, at the point when you're included, you would get residuals for that. And which means a lot of the time we have different performers getting residuals for different types of releases. So when they have a feature film and then they release a director's cut, there might be more people in that version than there would be in the regular version. The cast that's in the picture in the version as it's released is who should be getting the residuals.
If I could just add, it's not really applicable to DVDs specifically, but the union does engage various monitoring services. So we do have an ability to see whether and how your product ran. The key is we have to know to look, which is why some diligence on the member side is also appreciated. And oftentimes our claims in this area are prompted by someone calling us and saying, hey, did I get everything I'm owed for this project? And that prompts us to look at that specific project, which then yields the claim if that's appropriate.
Yeah, to Ray's point, we are monitoring things and we initiate a lot of claims on our own, but every single television and episode and movie that's been made since 1950 under either any SAG-AFTRA or AFTRA contract being exhibited somewhere on the planet on any given day is a lot of volume. So we need to work as a team, the members and staff.
Great, that's great. Our next question is, do you earn residuals on a co-star role if it's canceled after its first season, especially if it's on network's website to stream?
Again, yes, as long as it's being exhibited. So obviously there are many, many series that have been out of production for many, many years that are still being exhibited somewhere. Some of them are even on free TV, not just on the streaming sites. So yes, just because the show is no longer in production, or let's say it got canceled mid-season, so they had shot more episodes than actually aired if it was a network primetime show. If they put every single episode into distribution in the foreign territories, or they stream every single episode, then yes, the fact whether or not your show is in production doesn't really determine the residuals. It's that exhibition pattern that does.
Great. Our next question is, why are there negative amounts on the residual statement at times?
Okay, so yeah, this is pretty common, maybe less so as we have fewer big DVD releases. That can happen for a couple different reasons. So sometimes it's a recoupment of some sort, meaning residuals were paid to you that now for some reason, ended up being an overpayment. That can be either they paid residuals, let's say they shipped a whole bunch of DVD units and they paid residuals and they didn't take a big enough reserve, and then a bunch of those came back. So now what they thought were sales turned out not to be sales. You're going to see a recoupment for that. Sometimes we have performers who are omitted from a cast. So let's say they pay residuals to everybody initially. They forget a group of either, singers or somebody who was in post-production. When you add those people into the pool, you saw in that distributor's gross receipts example, that shifts the money. As soon as you have more people, money's going to shift around. So you could see the negative for that reason. Occasionally, the companies will just book something wrong. We had one circumstance where a studio paid residuals on a theatrical motion picture, and they put a decimal in the wrong place. And so instead of paying on, hundreds of thousands of dollars, they paid on millions of dollars. It was a big problem. So you can see a recoupment there. Sometimes licenses get canceled. There can be any number of reasons. Usually that that will be attached to a gross receipts-based residual where they're reshuffling money. But sometimes it can also happen if it was a network primetime rerun. Because the network primetime reruns are due 30 days after that exhibition, they have to rush through the processing of those payments. And sometimes they rush them through before they realize that that network primetime run didn't happen. You know, maybe it got preempted or it got canceled for some reason. So generally that means something went wrong or something's getting adjusted. And so monies that were paid to you already are being, you know, either shuffled to a different place or just sort of recovered unless or until they become due to you again.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, so here's a good question. And I think this is sort of my overall thought about this. A lot of times we know what we mean, but other people don't necessarily, because this is like, for some people who've never touched this stuff, some of these things are complex. Can you give us some examples and define and explain different type of residuals that are listed under the statement under the market, such as pay TV, electronic sell-through, internet rental, forward extended use, and other types or categories that are not as obvious as like free TV or video or DVD? Can you walk us through all that?
Sure. So pay TV is going to be your premium pay channels. HBO, Showtime, Stars are the ones that come to my mind immediately. So that's pay TV. When you get residuals on your and it says pay TV on your statement, though, if you, let's say you get a payment for your work on a network show and it shows up on your statement and it says you're getting paid for a pay TV exhibition, that might also be in flight. So when a television show is exhibited or a new media show is exhibited on airlines, that's called in-flight use. So in-flight includes planes, trains, and ships, right? Not really automobiles, but cruise ships at the point when anybody's ever feeling safe enough to take a cruise again, flights, trains, buses, that's referred to as in-flight. It pays exactly the same percentage as that pay TV, the 3.6%. Most of the gross receipts-based residuals are calculated at that 3.6%. So that could also be included in your pay TV when you see that on your statement. Electronic sell-through is going to be download to own. So that is sort of the digital version of home video, right? So home video means I bought a disc, it came to me in the mail, or I bought it in a store. Electronic sell-through is going to be, you know, I went to iTunes or Amazon or somewhere and I paid that fee in order to download and own it forever. So electronic sell-through is also sometimes called download to own. Internet rental is going to be your SVOD platforms. Anytime they're paying for that new media availability. So it might be, again, that I'm not a Prime subscriber, but I pay $3 to be able to watch a show for 48 hours. That's internet rental, that limited time availability. Or I'm a SVOD subscriber. That's internet rental. So foreign extended use is going to be the point at which those foreign free TV licenses make that switch from that 35% of applicable minimum to a gross receipts-based residual. So when you're licensing a TV show around the whole planet outside the US and Canada, those license values are aggregating money, right? So it's for free TV, meaning broadcast, basic cable, and free streaming. All that money gets aggregated. First, you get that fixed residual, the 35% of TAM. And then when the grosses hit a certain threshold, for shows made after 1998, this was another one of those improvements as a result of a negotiation. It used to be you got that 35% of TAM, and then it could be in foreign TV everywhere forever, and you never got another residual. Now you get that gross receipts-based residual for every dollar that comes in over that threshold in perpetuity. That's your foreign extended use. Trying to think what other categories there are besides that might be. I guess the ad-supported streaming is your AVOD, your free streaming. I don't know, if people think of other ones, they can tell me. Basic cable, I know what I can do. So basic cable, let's say you work on a basic cable show, you're going to get those rerun descending percentage of TAM. At the point when it switches to a gross receipts-based residual, you'll see that as basic, I think it's second sale. So if you see a second sale, that means you're getting that gross receipts-based residual instead of the rerun-based residual. Same with secondary digital, I think is another one of our codes. That means it's going to, one of those secondary digital, meaning like Me TV or Cozy TV, those ones that were sort of a result of everybody going to the digital spectrum. So now instead of just getting channel 5, I get channel 5.2 or 5.4 or whatever. That's your secondary digital. Those are the ones that are coming to my mind off the top of my head.
Ray, did you have anything you wanted to jump in on, or
No, I think that was very thorough. I can't think of any other of the codes that might be floating out there.
Great. Okay. So, we have so many great questions. Here's one. What is the policy for stunt utility receiving residuals? This person says, I've received residuals on 95% of projects, but when asked the SAG residuals department concerning a certain project, which had paid residuals to other performers with the same stunt utility designation, I was told this was not a residual position. They would not put in a claim. Can you explain that?
So the response was probably related more to what you did on the show or whether or not you actually appeared on, in the picture when it was released, as opposed to the category that you worked. So any performer may or may not get residuals depending on whether what they do ends up in the show or not. So you could be a utility stunt performer and have an on-camera stunt in one picture and be a utility stunt performer in another picture, not have an on-camera stunt. You would get residuals for one, but not the other. At least that's how it's supposed to work. Sometimes the companies are a little sloppy. We will obviously go after what we refer to as cast list omissions for any performer who is seen or heard in a picture and isn't getting residuals for that. We tend not to tell companies to stop paying performers that they've included, even if they aren't seen or heard. I would just encourage you as members not to try to go down that road because, again, when you're talking about these gross receipts-based residuals, it's a limited pool, and it's supposed to be residuals for the people who are in the picture. So that's the way we enforce it. We go after trying to get people added. We don't generally, we leave it to the companies to figure out who is or isn't in the picture. But when they make a mistake and leave someone out, we will go tell them you've left this person out. But again, it's tied to not how you were, what you were called when you did the work. It's whether or not you were actually in it. So I would think that was probably the answer to that question. But if it wasn't, we can talk about that offline.
Jen, how does rehearsal factor into that? Once you're determined that you're in the picture, what is the work that counts for purposes of calculating your share?
So yeah, it would include all your time worked, which would be rehearsal time is work time, so that counts. So if you're a day player and you went to work one day and all you did was rehearse, and then they actually did the filming the next day, your work is 2 days for that picture. So it's however many days you work on a picture. And that would be true for stunt performers as well. For pretty much any performer, it's going to be based on the total of the work that you did. Now, if you have days that aren't considered work days, those won't be included, but all your work time will be included.
That's great. We've got another great specific question here. I wanted to get a clarification for those voiceover actors who do ADR, WALA for animated feature, for example, a Disney animated feature. Are these voice performers technically in the same residual category as an on-camera performer would be in a live action feature? And they just didn't see a clarification on this on the website. So WALA
can be kind of a specific thing that if Ray wants to go onto the WALA distinction, he can. But yes, when you're doing that additional dialogue, you are a principal performer. You're heard just like a singer who does an original recording for a picture when they do those original songs that are made for those Disney movies as well. Singers are heard in the picture. They get residuals, and ADR groups who actually are engaged on pretty much every single picture, not just animation. Basically, every TV episode, feature film is going to have some sort of ADR group that's working on that picture. And absolutely, they are providing additional dialogue. They are principal performers. They're mostly day performers, and they are included in the residuals when they're paid just like any other day performer would be.
Great. Ray, did you want to jump in?
Oh, I just wanted to ask a follow-up to that, just to flesh out the issue a little bit. What happens if your voice gets stripped out in a foreign version of the picture?
Okay, so yeah, that would be, usually that's specific to animation. And yes, where they are releasing an animated picture to a foreign territory, and they're not using our performers' voices, and instead they're using a dubbed version, so it's in a local language, then they're not using your performance, so you wouldn't get residuals for those particular countries where only that dubbed version is being released.
Great. Thanks, Ray. Thanks for adding on there. Okay, this is wonderful. Here's a great question too. I did an episode of FBI. It's called Broken Promises. I was paid for 2. The other one I was paid for was called Safe Room. But why was I paid for an episode that I didn't perform in?
So again, there could be a couple different reasons. Either clip use or recap are what I'm thinking. So a lot of the time when you're working on a series, most of us have watched TV at some point when they say, last week on FBI, they show some scenes that happened. And if you're in that recap, they've now used your performance in that new episode. So you didn't actually show up and do the work on that new episode, but they used you. So because you appear, you're going to get residuals for that. Or if they had some sort of flashback. Now you should have gotten a clip use payment if it's that flashback, or there might have been some other compensation that you got paid as well. Hopefully that did happen, but either way, if you're appearing in that episode, because like I said, it's probably either clip use or a recap, then you should be getting residuals because your performance is in that other episode as well, and that's appropriate, and that would be my assumption about why you're getting residuals for 2 episodes, even though you only worked on 1.
That's a happy thing if that's the case. And how and why are residual pay cycles different for different platforms? So streaming platforms like Amazon and Netflix versus, television and theatrical release. And so this person also wanted to know, how can I know if residual payments are late when there's so many differences? They're just trying to soak up the information.
Yeah, that is mostly a product of negotiation, right? So Screen Actors Guild started off with, engaging performers who worked on theatrical motion pictures that were going to, at the time, expected only to be in theaters. AFTRA started off with live television that was maybe not even expected to ever run other than once. But initially, those theatrical performers expected to see those pictures in theaters worldwide in perpetuity and not get residuals. So when those pictures started going somewhere else, the formulas got negotiated and kicked in for use of theatrical pictures outside of theaters. The minute they go anywhere outside of theaters now, you've got a residual triggered. It's going to be based on revenue that's received in a quarter. TV, as a result, where they expected that one exhibition to be all that ever happened. So now you get residuals when there's a rerun. Pay TV when it came on the scene, had a really different type of exhibition pattern, right? They were there was this big argument, is pay TV actually, more like theaters? So you got 10 exhibition days, and you can show it as many times as you want in a 24-hour period. You can take a year to use up that time. It's really just a product of how things got negotiated over the many, many decades that the unions have been doing that. I think it's a sort of a rule of thumb would be, if something goes to a new type of exhibition, expect residuals in maybe 6 to 8 months following that new type of exhibition is a good sort of rule of thumb. Obviously, some of them are going to come in more quickly than that. A network primetime would be due a lot more quickly. But if you think about it being, a quarter runs about 3 months, they got 60 days to report to us, another 30 days or so to get the check to you. That gets us in that 6 to 8 month range for when you should be seeing some sort of payment if it's a new release. So that first time it goes to pay TV, or that first time it goes to a streaming platform. And then after that, if it's been in distribution for a while, maybe once a year, right? So if it's been a year and you haven't seen another payment, you could check with us to see what's going on. A lot of the time, the licenses will have a runoff at the end. So you'll see a payment, let's say something moves over to basic cable and it's a 10-year license. They're going to make payments maybe every quarter at the beginning, maybe once a year for a few years thereafter. And then there's going to be this runoff of several years later on, where you won't get any residuals. Generally, if I'm a producer and I'm licensing something, I want a period of time where that license is fully paid, so that if a exhibitor defaults on a payment, I have time left to do a remedy, right, to get my picture back, rather than having the last payment due at the end of that license. And now they've got the full use, and how am I supposed to go get that money when they've already used up the whole? It gets a lot harder, right? We had one series where they cycled through the seasons as to how they paid the residuals. So performers who were in the early seasons saw like 6 quarters of residual payments, and then they're going to see many, many years of no residuals because they got fully paid for that season. It covers the whole license. And then the performers in the later seasons saw, quite a long period of time of exhibition before their season got paid. So it can vary a lot, but like I said, I'd reach out about 6 to 8 months after a brand new exhibition that is not covered by your initial comp, or maybe every year to year and a half if you're not seeing residuals for continued exhibition on TV. A lot of the time stuff will be available on home video for many, many years. If you're seeing like second sellers, or it's not a big splashy new release, the tiny percentage of the revenue that gets split among the whole cast is probably not enough to issue checks, or it's probably not even revenue that's, it's going to individuals who are reselling stuff as opposed to the studio that actually released it. So got to think about, does it really look like there's revenue there?
Thank you for that. We have time for just a couple more questions. Why are we not getting residuals for shows that are broadcast on YouTube channels where commercials are being shown, and yet we receive nothing, though there are millions of views? They're receiving income through commercials. Where are the actors' residuals?
So that could be a couple different reasons. So first, if it's going to YouTube, which is advertiser video on demand, AVOD, or free video on demand, FVOD, you might be getting one payment that's covering 26 weeks of use. You get like a 5.5% of applicable minimum. That'll cover the full 6 months of use. After that, it's a gross, after the first year, it's a gross receipts-based residual. So it depends on the revenue. The other reason why you might not be would be if we do have one type of contract, that's our low budget new media contract. So if it's not that high budget category, there aren't think of it like if you work on a low budget new media show, something that's made for new media, and the budget is, either the content is very short or the budget is very low. AVOD, which is what YouTube is, would be included in your initial comp. There wouldn't be residuals for that. But if it's a TV show, which I think, did you say this was a TV? No, you just said residual. So it could be low budget new media where AVOD, we haven't yet been able to negotiate a residual for those low budget new media shows that are being shown on the free platforms. That would be sort of the one time when there wouldn't be anything due.
If I could just add, one thing to that, it could also be piracy. Where it's not the studio that's actually making the show available on YouTube. It's an end user that has put that up on their YouTube channel. YouTube may nevertheless run commercials against that content, off to the side as you watch YouTube, but that money's not actually going to the studio. It's not actually going to the person who owns the intellectual property. We obviously want studios to enforce their rights in that situation and, have this work taken down if it's up without permission. But oftentimes where that inquiry has come to my attention about YouTube exhibitions, that's often been the case, especially with older shows. The users put these shows up. And that does not generate revenue for our employer, and so there isn't a residual that ultimately becomes due on that.
Yeah, piracy, otherwise known as theft. So here's a question for you, Ray. If residuals are no longer counted towards our health insurance, why are members still required to pay dues on them?
Well, first I want to clarify, what exactly the change in the rules was. If you are a retiree and you are over 65, but you're not taking a pension, then you will still, your sessional earnings and your residual earnings will both still apply. It's if you are over 65 and taking a pension, that the rule changed and reverted back to the rule that existed at the legacy SAG health plan, where that now is no longer counting towards your health plan eligibility. So the rule has not changed for most people. It's a specific change that applies to people over 65 who are taking a pension. The thing I would emphasize in my response to that is that these are separate decisions being made by separate organizations. The health plan makes the decision about whether a certain category of earnings counts towards your qualification or not, and they make that connected to the health plan's economics, and that is made, and the health plan is a separate organization with its own board of trustees that makes that decision independently of the union. The union makes the decision about how to calculate dues, and it makes that decision based on the union's economics. So, for example, if you are receiving residuals, the union continues to incur expenses processing those residuals. And so the union makes its decision about how to assess dues itself separately from the health plan. So essentially, these are two separate decisions made by separate organizations for the reasons that are relevant to those two organizations.
Yeah, and if people have questions about the union's dues, those can be found in the SAG-AFTRA Constitution and otherwise, where those kinds in merger agreement, where all that stuff gets laid out. The next question, and we've just got a few more. Why do you allow producers to deduct 10 to 15% of episodic fees for prepaid residuals? Is it costing actors millions of dollars? Not to mention, it's also hurting plan contributions, pension plan contributions. If you do choose to answer this, please give a cogent answer, not something like it's been in the contract for a long time. Regardless of that, it destroys residual income for so many. So can you explain that, Ray? I didn't think you were going to give that other answer, but go ahead, or Jen, either one of you.
Jen, why don't you start and I'll follow you.
Okay, so really, it's compressing your initial compensation is what it's doing. So the residuals that are getting paid to you when they're getting advance paid are the same value dollars as you would be getting. It's just the timing has changed. But what that's doing is putting a downward pressure on your initial compensation. So yeah, we have tried in many rounds to limit or to even eliminate. In the most recent negotiation, we made sure that as the syndication formula got adjusted, that those residuals would not be allowed to be prepaid. I mean, that was one moment where we were able to actually make a gain there. The 10 to 15% might be a reference to the Netflix agreement that we have. That was another place where we were able to make a gain there. We know that it's frustrating for performers who would rather get residuals as they become due later on. You should know it has zero impact on your contribution dollars, on the plan dollars, because your total earnings, so it would impact the timing of those contributions. If you're getting all the residuals and all your initial comp paid up front, you're going to get contributions on all that money at the same time. But the contributions are also, the dollars are the same. So the residuals of dollars are the same, the contribution dollars are the same. It's impacting the timing of that. And what we know is actually happening is they're compressing your initial compensation rate by including advance pay of residuals in there. Instead of that all being your initial comp, it's residual dollars. But those dollars from a residuals perspective are the same dollars that you would get if you were paid them later. And sometimes they're sort of overpaying residuals. You know, if that show ends up not getting exhibited, you get to keep that money, even though if it were paid later as residuals, you never would have seen it. But we are, like I said, we know this is a source of frustration for members. We are doing what we can in negotiations to try to make put limits on that. And Ray, you probably want to add something maybe?
Yeah, I would just say that, as the questioner noted, and I promise this won't be the only response I give, but that has been in the contract since the 1950s. We don't have good records to demonstrate how or why that came into the agreement, back when it did. One speculates it might have something to do with the logic of money now is generally considered better than money later. But what we know has happened over the years is the way the ability to advance pay has been used, as Jen alluded to, is it's used to lower your initial comp. So this is a good point for members to be aware of and for you to have direct conversations with your agent about this. Because what happens is you come in to the negotiation thinking, I want to achieve my quote, and my quote is X thousand dollars. Your agent tries to go get your quote from the producer. The producer doesn't want to pay that much in initial compensation. And the way the deal gets struck is, okay, we'll get to your quote, but a certain amount of that money is actually going to be the advance payment of your residuals. And so it looks to you like you've gotten your quote and you're very happy and you think your agent's done a great job, when in reality, you didn't get your quote. You got less than your quote and you got prepaid some of your residuals to make it look like you got your quote. So that advance pay conversation is something you should have with your agent whenever you're doing these kind of negotiations, so that it's always clear to you what portion of your comp is truly initial comp and where that advance payment got used to make it look like you're getting more in initial comp than you are. That really kicked into high gear, that way of using advance pay, I would say in the 90s and the early 2000s. And we know it's been used by producers to try to replicate the fact that that we don't have, for example, a separate set of rates for basic cable, the way that writers and directors do. Writers and directors have a different scale for basic cable that's lower. We don't. We have the same scale for network as for basic cable. And so the producers started trying to use this ability to advance pay to sort of achieve a discount in basic cable comparable to what they were getting from writers and directors who had a lower scale. And so the way in which advanced pay got used changed from, when it first went into the agreement, those many years ago, as, basic cable in the late 90s and the early aughts really started to predominate. And so, and that's why it has been prioritized in bargaining. There is not an unlimited ability to advance pay. You can't advance pay a day player. There's limits built into the agreement as to how much compensation you can use for advance payment. And so we have been going to recent rounds of negotiations and trying to build up those protections to limit the ability to advance pay, because we obviously noted this is how it's being used now. It's really being used as a tactic to lower somebody's initial compensation. That's bad for us. We want more limits on advance pay. We have been moving in that direction.
That was super comprehensive. I hope the member asking the question feels like they got a lot of knowledge out of that. Our last question here is, with residuals after people retire, when you're deceased, is there a form that people can fill out, like for a beneficiary, so that things can be passed on? You touched on it briefly, Jen, earlier, but can you just clarify for that? I think that might have gone a little fast for some folks.
So yes, residuals can definitely continue beyond your life, and you definitely want to have your beneficiaries in place. Our estates department can help you with that, with anything that they can also help with, if you do corporation formation, all those sorts of things. If you call the 800 number that we had up earlier, they can actually get you directly to the trust and estates department. So if you have questions processing, sometimes even the customer care center can get you started with what would be needed when you have that initial touch base, and then for actually filling out forms and doing that sort of thing, our trust and estates department can help you with that.
Great. This was just a fantastic presentation. There's so much to learn for everybody. We're getting a lot of notes going, when are you guys going to come back? So maybe next year we'll have to have you come back and talk some more about all this. So it was just a fantastic discussion. I wish we could have gotten to all the questions, but I really want to thank everybody who joins all of these live stream events that are learning so much. We're making this time that is a hard time during the pandemic. At least we are improving what we know, and as we're all hopefully safely getting back to work over this next period of time, it's good to have built up our knowledge base. So I want to thank everybody who joined us today, and all of the SAG-AFTRA team for making this come together. I also want to thank all the people who are joining us every week on the President's Task Force for Education and Outreach and Engagement. If you haven't already done so, you can subscribe right down there on the YouTube to make sure that you get updates on the content that we're having, because we're having all this content and you can share it with your friends. So follow SAG-AFTRA on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram, and make sure you are subscribed to that channel. And I hope that we will actually get to see you all next week for our holiday event. Some surprises in store, so we'll hope to see you then. And I want to just thank Ray and Jen again. A big round of applause for them, virtual applause, for just what was a ton of information. And so all of our mathy brains have gotten our quota for the week. So thank you guys very much. And with that, for SAG-AFTRA, we'll see you guys next week.